hello, good afternoon, good evening to all my international friends, or whenever you're listening, wherever you're listening. Welcome to another episode of Revolution Gathering, live and direct. Hopefully you've liked and subscribed, so you're getting a notice right now that we are on. If you have not yet liked and subscribed, please do. We may be actually adding video to our Spotify. It looks like that's an option too, so you may be able to watch on Spotify as well as here on our YouTube channel. It really helps our YouTube channel if you like our gatherings and our little clips that we put on during the week. And if you subscribe, I know it's kind of a pain in the butt, you can also put on a little notice, the little thing, little bell, boop, and it'll let you know anytime we go live or post something new, which we do through the week. We also do that on our Instagram as well, so you can follow us there. So yeah, welcome to Revolution. So we did something new this week. Hopefully we'll see how it turns out, but someone donated $100 for us to do an Instagram ad, and we've never done that before. Really, we just boosted the post for $100 on our Revolution account. So we will see what happens. Good morning. A lot going on in the world and in my personal life. My daughter's birthday was Thursday, and we have her party after this. She's turning 8, and oh my gosh, it was so much fun. So on her birthday day, me and their mom, me and Karen and Milo and Minnie all went to. Minnie wanted to go to Red Robin's, which is really fun because it was my mom's. My mom loved chain restaurants. So bizarre. And so we all went there and had bottomless fries, and it was really fun. We had a fun time. And they sang happy birthday. That was, old school. It's like going back in time. But yeah, so that's going on today. So have you heard any good news lately? World is seems a little bit mad right now. Seems a little chaotic, especially if you're a resident of the United States. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I think we all have the right to be nervous and scared, and it's interesting because I think there's also some people who really hold tight to their politics and their politicians and their billionaires and their people that they put their faith in, and kind of just follow them, sometimes even without critical thought. And I get that. I think early years of my Christianity there was a lot of non-critical thinking, but I found that could be very dangerous and very disappointing over time. And I feel like that's where apologetics kind of come from, is the need to defend out of fear. Anyhow, the point there is watching our president argue with Elon Musk and watching those two guys go at each other as though neither one of their brains have fully formed. And what I mean by that is not like there's anything wrong with the brains, but just like teenagers. It was like having a meltdown. Feels a little bit like who's taking care of things? Oh, these guys. It's a bit nuts. Yeah. So there you go. That's the story we find ourselves in is a bit of a chaos. I think leaders who seem to be more concerned with being right than they are with the people, and what kind of world we're living in, and the stress that this is putting on everyday people who are just trying to live and work and make ends meet, and not to leave out all the hell that our immigrant friends are going through. And yes, this is not the first time it happened. ICE has been around for 12 years, and the Democrats also covered this kind of stuff. They just did it in the dark of night and did it in a lot more quieter ways. I mean, maybe they gave people a hearing, which is nice, but still, this all could be done in a much better way, and I don't think ICE is the answer. This is not me being political today. You'll think it's political, and that's okay, because it's definitely an opinion, but I'm going to give you opinion from where my opinion comes. So today I'm speaking as a follower of Christ. Today I am speaking as someone who's chosen the religion of Christianity, and I want to follow that way, and that's how I'm speaking today. And you will hear a lot of people, and this is why I believe in reform and why we've got to work towards reform, is you will hear a lot of people say, oh no, but the Christianity is following our politicians blindly, and that's just not it. And if you've come here to Revolution, you know that. And if you disagree, that's okay. We can argue well, we can disagree well, we can see where you're coming from too. I come from a long line of people who like to rebel. There and there, and Pee Wee Herman and Gumby, famous rebels. I mean, Pee Wee Herman, we all know he's a rebel. He's a loner. But today I'm speaking as someone who tries to follow Christianity and follow Christ to the best of my abilities, and grow in that and understand the nuances of that, and be a human being. And so I'm not today speaking to you as a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. I'm not speaking as a voter. I'm not speaking to you as an American. Why? Because humanity comes first when you follow Christ. And you're thinking, oh, Jay, not humanity, God comes first. We're going to talk a little bit about that, because remember, I think we've gone over enough verses that says, what are the two most important commandments? Love God with all your heart, and equally as important, love your neighbor as yourself. What's most important? When they asked Paul, what's most important? He said, faith expressing itself through love for others. And that's the hard, tough questions we need to be asking. To me, the state of religion and Christianity is a mess, continues to be a mess, and that's why I believe we are called to be reformers. And that's what we'll do. Revolution is here to have a revolution of a reform, of reformation. So it's not country, not government. It's not domination. It's not denominations. It's not your denomination that you've subscribed to, your religious denomination, Christian. It's not the religion. It's not rules. It's not even religion. It's love. And I can hear people right now going, well, what about Romans? What about Romans? Where he says, we'll go over Romans one day, but folks, let's look at the consistency of what the Apostle Paul said in that book of Romans, in his actual writings, and let's look at what Jesus said and what other people said. Even people like I would talk about doubt, and sometimes people will argue James with me. James is an interesting book, and I understand why Martin Luther, the reformist, was not a fan of it, but I also parts of James I really love. And the whole faith without works thing is it used to make me cringe until I realized it was about, not caring about those who are less than, and not caring about the hungry, and not caring about the cold, and not caring about those who are in need, and just passing them by and telling them, oh, take care of yourself, that type of thing. But growing up in what was the Assemblies of God theology most of my life, not anymore. Most of my life has been on the other side of that, because you get older and time moves really fast. But growing up, I was told by the church, and really my family, and by all the leaders and people in the church, that God always came first. You put God above family, and you put God above each other, you put God above self. And so I wanted to look at that for a second. What I found from that, my own experience. In the 12-step program, we talk about sharing our experience, strengths, and hope. And that's what I want to do a little bit right now. Is I found those to be empty words. Excuse to put religion first, often, or dogma first, or work first. Especially for Christian families who ignored their parents who were ignoring their children, ignoring their loved ones, It's very easy to just manipulate that. And it can also be an excuse to love less, and it's not seen as that way, but just, oh, I can't worry about that because I'm working for God. And you kind of get this idea, but it becomes an excuse to put all these people before your family and others, usually. And what I found, though, is also folks end up putting their politics come first because they get their religion and their politics often mixed together of those things. But I will say the first, the first like 10 years of my ministry, where I worked with a lot of younger people, teens and 20s, and a lot of what I was dealing with was kids whose family said they put God first. And basically that meant they were ignored. Their children were ignored. Certain things were ignored. I mean, even my family didn't even put education that high, because they thought, oh, God, I'm just following God. God's going to take care of it all. Like God's some sort of magician and magic thing, and that, just pixie dust all over, and we all just automatically are going to grow up and have great jobs and be, all this stuff, and God's just going to take care of it. It's in God's hands, And I think often we don't realize is that what God's hands look like are these our own hands, And that's what James, I think, was trying to tell us with faith without works is dead. And often seem to be people saying God comes first, like God comes first, wink. And I've noticed that a lot in political discussions over the years that I've had with different people over different. I used to be a very diehard Democrat. I've never been a Republican, but I was a diehard Democrat. Now I'm an independent, just because I'm more liberal than most Democrats. I consider myself a leftist. But in case you're wondering, but it kind of went with this wink is like you'd start talking about political things, and you said, but the Bible says, and then you get these really religious people who would disagree with you, and then they would be kind of like, oh, come on, Jay, like almost saying like, come on, I mean, that stuff's not real, and that stuff doesn't make a difference. So we have to, all of a sudden they would admit that they have to, that they're more dependent on these politicians, and their faith is more in politicians, and their belief system is more based in politics than it would be based in their own faith. But of course, if you said something to the contrary about your politics, they would say, you can't put your faith in it. So it was very much like, picking and choosing what you want, how you wanted that to work. And especially when I speak about the poor and when I speak about hungry children and things like that, it almost becomes an insult to hear people try to justify why they don't think children should have free meals and be taken care of and loved, or when it comes to immigrants, or when it comes to war. All of a sudden we're just going to take God out of that, or, justified war. And then they start, not realizing that Christianity for the first 300 years until Constantine comes along has no involvement in military, no involvement in any type of violence. It's a completely nonviolent movement for the first 300 years. So it did pretty well, not being totally involved with politics. But then Constantine comes along and says, well, we're going to make this the religion of the nation. We're going to make this our religion, and then we're going to put crosses on our weapons, and we're going to put crosses on these things, and so we get into that, and we end up starting to have just war. So that doesn't come from anyone in the Bible. It doesn't come from any tradition of Christianity except about 300 years into Christianity. That's the importance of knowing the history of your faith. That's the importance of knowing, like, some of these things that we consider law, or some of these things we think we're supposed to do, often come from governments and people and traditions just snuggling their way in there, sneaking their way in there. And over time, we just think, oh, well, this is just as true as anything else. And so we have to, that's why it's good to know. Hey, were we not? Is everything here? Was this not up? Was the talk not up? Did someone miss the talk? Have we had any problems? Let me know if there's been any technical difficulties. But yeah, so really they were, people lie. And I don't think they lie on purpose. I think they lie because they get uncomfortable. We get, and so we live in this kind of world of where people have their own nuances. They don't want to see nuances anything else, but then they have their own nuances. And that's tough. But today, as I think about, as you know, as what Jesus said, as you do unto the least of these, you do to me. You do to God. Thank you, Zoe. You know, as you do to the least of these, you do to me. And I think it's time to say, who are the least of these? And right now, I think it's very simple to say in the United States, as our immigrant brothers and sisters, as we see what's happening to them all over this country. As I said before, I don't think the way it's being done by any stretch of the imagination is right. We see a lot of people who we were told, like, oh, we're just going to get criminals out of here. We're just going to get rid of those people who are here illegally, but you know, they need to be trying. You know, what about all those people who tried? But now we see that all these people at courthouses who are trying to become citizens legally are being deported and deported to places that they're not from. And it's horrific. It's torturing those individual human beings. And we often just say the us's and them's and want to make them into big people and a big group, so they just become muddled. And it's like almost like they don't really exist, or they're a group. And that's what racism and prejudice and scapegoating allows us to do. Is allow us to dehumanize other humans. We're very good at that. And that's where we're at right now. We are dehumanizing groups of people, saying, well, now we're going to just call them illegals. And we've done that with the LGBTQ community. We've done that in the history with the black community. We've done it with so many communities, the Jewish community. Right now we're doing it with the Muslims community as well. We're doing it with Palestinians, as though we dehumanize them to justify evil, to justify not treating them as like, well, all of a sudden they're not the least of these because they're a problem. And what happens is we become hypocrites, we become liars, and we show our cards. We show that we're not really following Jesus, we're not really following Christianity, that we're America first, or we're country first, or we're this first, or we're law and order. You know, all of a sudden those things become way more important, and you show it. You make it very clear. I watch these pastors talking about how we shouldn't question the government or question the president, and we shouldn't be bipartisan. And I'm going like, these guys are just showing their hands. They're just showing their hands that this is not Christianity that they're following. They're nationalists, you know. And that's, if they want to be nationalists, be nationalists. But I'm not. Don't claim that it's Christianity. I don't like the word Christian nationalist. I think it should be called nationalist Christians, because I think the nationalism should come first, because that's what they're obviously saying to us out loud. In my opinion, it's very hard to bring those two together. It's very hard to not be live in hypocrisy and have some sort of contradiction. Now, contradiction isn't always wrong. We all are going to have contradictions in our lives. There's going to be certain contradictions that we just have to live with. Often we can find something even greater than truth above the contradiction. If you look at it in a more of a psychological way, or more of a more of a what is the word I'm looking for? This often happens. I find out. I've been reading about ADHD, and this often happens where you lose words. Philosophical. In a philosophical stance, the contradiction is not the end of truth. Sometimes it's a greater truth. I love philosophy. I wish I was better at it, but this is where I'm at right now. So I've had people use excuses like this. Well, Jay, what about fentanyl? You know, I had somebody who I loved and died from fentanyl. Or I had this, you know, and we just want to see this stop happening. These folks are bringing in the fentanyl and they're doing this. But we often forget to realize that oxycodone kind of led the big oxycodone thing that happened here with our own big pharma, really opened up the floodgates to put fentanyl back on the map. You know, and so, you know, that's the, what is it, the Sackler family, you know, who introduced oxycodone to make it so it wasn't just a cancer drug anymore, but because it should be for cancer patients. My mother died horrifically of cancer and needed that kind of treatment. But then they started saying like, oh, we can give oxycodone to people who just have back pain and things like that. And drug addiction developed all over our country. It just swept over. And then fentanyl came in as a much cheaper, easier to come by option. So, you know, for us to say, well, it's all those folks who made it happen. And I'm going to tell you something else, because we had one of our leaders over the past couple of years die from drug addiction, die from a drug addiction from the oxycodone that came into this country and after he got hurt and caused him to have an addiction. And that addiction killed him, unfortunately. And it's very sad to me that that happened. Also, heroin is another replacement for oxycodone. So I think we have to learn to really be educating ourselves to think critically and look beyond just, oh, well, this is what happened. It's so easy. Another thing, as being in recovery myself, I know one thing about drug addicts is it's really hard to blame just the particular people where they get the drugs, because if you're an addict, you will find a way to get drugs, period. That is not to make an excuse for fentanyl. I'm just saying that as part of it. Drug addiction is a horrible beast, and it's a disease. You know, unfortunately, we act like it's the people abusing it. Well, you know, addiction is a disease, folks, and we've got to look at that as well. So I think we've got to wake up to the realities of the world that we find ourselves in, the story that we find ourselves in, and live in that within that reality. I think by looking at that, that's as more of a human way. And I think there's a more humane way for us to enforce the law when it comes to our immigrant brothers and sisters who are here. I mean, we're all immigrants in the United States, you know, unless you're a Native American, you're an immigrant, folks. You know, that's the rub of where we're going at. But there is a more human way to do this. You know, even like if you look at the IRS, you know, they send you letters, and if they don't get your letters, they send someone to your house. They don't arrest you. They come and go, hey, we've got an issue. We need to meet with you. We've got to do this. You know, there are more humane ways to handle this situation that treats people like people, that allows people to have humanity and allows people to legally come here. Or if they are to be deported, in a way where it's a safe way to do that. I mean, we've got to remember that Obama and Biden, all those guys put these folks in cages as well. And here's the thing, as an American, you might say, well, it just makes sense. You know, you can't have open borders. We don't want this. This is what we got to do. And as an American, that might be your thing. But for me, as someone who follows Christ and thinks that Christ calls me to a higher law of loving my neighbor as myself and loving my enemy as myself and loving humanity as myself, I have to think about that. If this was me, how would I want it handled? If these were my children, would I want them in cages? Would I want my kids deported in the middle of the day? Or would I want my kids to come home after school and not find a parent home? I mean, that's terrifying. And the fact that somehow people who say they're followers of Christ allow that to happen to others really shows the hand of where their faith is as far as their love for others. They may love God with all their heart, but they're missing the part of loving their neighbor as their self. And you might think I'm being judgmental. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm trying to be honest so we can move to closer to an honest conversation and help people change. My whole point is I hope to convert these people, not to convert them to Christianity, but to convert them to loving others more, to seeing others' humanity in more of a loving way, to love people. Often people outside of the church are much more loving than following Christ. They just don't love God, but they love their neighbor as themselves. And honestly, Paul Tillich often argued that people who love that way know God more than those who don't love people calling themselves Christians that way, because God is love. And that is an argument from one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th century that I happen to agree with. He talks about grace is reunion and sin is separation. And so those are things to hold in your mind as we watch what's happening today. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with justice, like I said, but justice with love. But justice without love is just tyranny. And I think we've got to talk about justice, not chaos in this world. Remember when we did Galatians, folks? Remember when we did Galatians for how many times? 12 times, and then we did it 16 times the year before, and then we probably did it 10 times the year before. And then, how many times? I mean, at every part we've gone through Galatians a lot. If you're a part of Revolution, if you're new to Revolution, you'll hear a lot about the book of Galatians, especially in the beginning of the year. We always do a big, intense study on the book of Galatians, and there's a reason for that. I hope for the day where I go, oh, I don't think Galatians is really what we need right now. So when we see things like Galatians, it makes it clear that we're not following Christ if we're not seeing each other as human beings. If love is not at the foundation, remember what Paul said, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, male nor female, slave nor free, for we are all one. Remember that part? In Christ. So if you want to see your neighbor as Christ sees your neighbor, as in Christ, then you will see them as yourself. You will see equality there. Paul is begging people to come together and not bite and devour and destroy each other. What we see are people destroying one another. The protests we're seeing in LA, some of it violent, is what you see is people who are saying, we love our fellow human beings. We love diversity in our city. We care about human life. Unfortunately, sometimes it seems like the only ones that Christians really concern themselves with is unborn children. And after that, they're just like, meh. Not anybody living life on life's terms, eh. What did Paul in Corinthians say? We've talked about that this year. Without love, without love as our foundation, it's just all a show, or just a show, or a noise. It's just noise and a show without love. And so this is why these opinions do make a difference. This is why what's happening right now in the world is important if you are a follower of Christ, if you've chosen Christianity as your, and there's a lot of people who don't choose Christianity, and this is still important to them. And I'm grateful for you. And if you're here and you say, Jay, I don't buy into Christianity, but I want to love people more, well, we're here to encourage that as well. Like I said, I'm not here to convert you to Jesus and to tell you you're going to hell. I'm here to convert you and tell you to love other people and make hell less here on earth. That's the point for me today, for Revolution today. That's why we say grace is anarchy. And these folks who were working to hurt other people, we have to remember they're not the enemy. What they follow is the enemy. The misinformation is the enemy. These laws are unjust laws, and when you have unjust laws, then you need to disobey those unjust laws, and that's a nonviolence idea, and I get that from Dr. King and from Gandhi, and there's some great books on nonviolence. I've recommended them on the Revolution on my own Instagram, and I'll recommend them again so you guys will know what they are. When I think about the LA protests and what's happening, I think about the cops and how we're bringing in the armed forces, and how these people have more in common with the folks they are fighting than the powers that have called them to do this injustice, that have called them to be violent and to take people out of their lives in a violent way. They have more in common with each other than those calling the shots. I'm going to say it again. The way I believe ICE is working is not the way. I believe there is a human way to do it, and this is not it. There's a human way for us to continue and talk and have these conversations, but this is not it. And I really do believe we are taking a step back in this country. We're stepping back. And I wish we had a political system or a party that would denounce these things. But unfortunately, both political parties have made these happen. One was just really smarter of hiding it than this one. But I hope we're waking up. I hope what's coming out of this is that we're waking up to the reality of injustice and humane treatment of others and each other, that we wake up and we go, okay, we got to do this differently. We got to think differently. If we're going to really be involved with politics and we want this to be a country where people are treated with humanity and with love and with grace and justice, then we've got to think of a different way to operate. And I hope we're learning our lesson, because I know a lot of us just feel like we just want to give up and we'd almost take anybody else and But I hope we see a bigger picture and a bigger future where we go, okay, we don't want this done in front of us, but we also don't want this done behind our backs. I mean, that's almost worse. So the fact that we can come to the reality of what human suffering is and what we're doing with our votes, with our political concepts and our ideas. Unfortunately, often the politicians and the powers that be have us fighting, and that's how they keep their power. They keep us divided. Do you remember that movie, The Bug's Life? And they had to give a bunch of food to the grasshoppers every year. Their first crops had to go to the grasshoppers, and give them all their food. And all the grasshoppers are sitting around one day talking to each other, and they're like, so they didn't give us. It's not like we really need their food, They're just small ants, who needs them, and they're all having like, I don't know, they're eating something like pieces of corn or something, and the guy keeps popping them out, the leader, and all of a sudden he lets 100 of them fall on this one guy, and he goes, "You all don't realize that there's a few of us and there's thousands of them. And if they ever realize how many of them there are, we're in big trouble. If they realize they're a majority, so it's not that we need their food, it's that we have to keep this idea that we're in power. We have to keep the illusion alive that we are in power and that this is happening." And one of the ways the world does that today, leaders do that today, is by keeping us divided through identity politics. And they'll do it so well, and you see the corporations and stuff. Like this year, we see all the corporations backing off from Pride, which is really wild. It seems like they're very short-sighted people. But we realize they're doing it over money. They're not doing it because they support LGBTQ people. They're doing it, they support when they know it's going to make them money. They pull back when they think it's going to hurt them. So it's not out of love, it's about the bottom line. And that's a hard reality to see. And so it comes down to the bottom line, unfortunately. And so when we see that type of thing, you realize that because when they celebrate, they come in, they celebrate our identity. Oh, these people are, Budweiser really likes me. Coca-Cola really likes me. Oh, the Democratic Party, they really like me. So maybe I'll ignore them, supporting an unjust war and sending millions of dollars of weapons to certain places, and because they really support me, they really care about me. But they really care about you as often as a voting base, both sides. And it's very, so they want to. This is how they get your loyalty. I mean, like what you see what's happening with Target. Nobody's going to Target right now. We're all saying no. We think you should hire people of color and things like this. We don't think you should get rid of those hiring ideas. And now we're not going there, because what we realize is that they didn't care about having minorities working for them necessarily. It just looked really good for them, and they got a lot of business. And then when they realized that DEI wasn't going to work for them anymore, they pulled it. And now it's not working for them. And now what are they doing? Now they're holding on like, what do we do? I don't know what they're waiting for. I guess they're just trying not to save face a little bit. Maybe they'll slowly work it back in. But we thought, well, they really care. There's a company that care. I like to go to because they care. And that's the thing. Or Christians going to Chick-fil-A they're closed on Sunday. So I think that's something to think about, is these identities. They really want us to cherish our identities so much that we almost have an us in them. They want us to create an us in them. And one of the things I've learned through nonviolence, and I've learned through the Poor People's Campaign and things like that, is that they've weaponized that. They really created the concepts of identities and really hit into the identity, so we would be so focused with that anybody against us would be our enemy. So the conservatives, I mean, you think Donald Trump is like, just these Christian people are just, they're the best, and I really care about them. No, they're his voting group. Do you think he necessarily doesn't like gays and things like that? I don't know. But for him, that's not who's going to vote for him. That's not who's going to give him power. So it's easier to divide us up. And once we become identities rather than people, we can take away the humanity again. And so we have less humans, and all of a sudden now they're not really the less of them. They're a group that we all might be happier if that group was out or not here or that. You see what I'm saying? And the left fall into this all the time as well. I mean, every time I see groups doing deconstruction and things like this, and Christians who found deconstruction are often like ex-smokers. You know, you kind of become legalistic towards all that. Oh, smoking! Oh, get that cigarette away from you! You become really judgmental of the past, and we have to guard our hearts from that as well, because often we just become the same asses with a different. You know, we just have rainbow flags, and we're more inclusive of this group, but we have a whole nother group to exclude now, and it's like we hold on to that exclusion, and that's what we talked about last week, and I think the week before. So let's see what how do the powers that be keep us divided? By pointing out our differences. What are some of these differences? Because there's a few that I just didn't name, and I want us to think about this. Also, one more thing, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps us here. So if you do that, it really helps keep Revolution going and get us in the algorithm, which is nice. I wish we didn't have to do that, but it's just part of it. Pointing out our differences. So what are some of our differences they use against us? Racially, racial differences, income, economy, ethnicity, which it can be anything, you know. It can be our customs and our cultures and all these different things. They use those to separate us from each other. Our gender, our sexuality, our religion, our nationality, our social status. Again, income. I don't know why I put that twice, but I must have really been thinking of it. Education. You know, well, I'm really educated, and these poor people, they don't understand things like I do. And they use these things to keep us divided and separate, that allows them to have power and money. And when we see this continue to happen over and over again, and realize that we have two political systems that really use this against us, we've got to say, okay, something's got to change. And people might say, well, I just want to breathe. You know, I just want to breathe. I just want to breathe. Give me anybody. You know, give me any Democrat, and I'll be able to breathe. But they're still doing it. So as followers of Christ, we have to ask, what is the most human way to be leaders? You know, instead of being like, you know, Reverend King said, you know, I don't look around and test the census. I don't take, you know, polls of what people are thinking, what their convictions are. You know, he's like, I'm not a follower of others' convictions. I'm a developer of convictions. I bring change. You know, those are the things that I bring that to people to help them. You know, we're not taking questionnaires to see which way the wind blows. You know, we want to be revolutionaries. We want to be reformers, but to do that, we have to lead. And it's not always, thinking is not always going to be the popular way. I mean, one of the reasons MLK was so unpopular during the Poor People's Campaign is because people felt he was losing focus, because there were also white people and Hispanic people and Jewish people, all these people in poverty that were being helped. And, you know, and then when he spoke out against the Vietnam War, and he was like, well, you know, and King had to continue to remind people, it's humanity. I'm here not just, you know, civil rights is not just for people of color. It's also to help change these white folks from their hate and from their misinformation and from their prejudice. It's also to help them and to win friendship, not to conquer them. And so often we get into these ideas that we have to conquer people, but that's not love, you know. And fortunately or unfortunately, you know, the Apostle Paul says love never gives up, never loses faith, is always endures through every circumstance. So these are the things that we're called to do, and to not allow these things to separate us, and not to weaponize, you know, racial issues, income issues, ethnic issues, gender issues, sexuality, religion, nationality, social status, or education. That we should not be using these as weapons to separate us, or, you know, especially with income. You know, often the homeless among us, which there doesn't have to be in the richest country in the nation, in the world, but unfortunately we often use that as, they use homeless as a fear tactic to keep us in line. Now, I know this sounds like a fantasy, but reality, this is just the reality we live in every day. And so it's important to think about these things if we want to see real change in the church and real change within the world. Do not allow politics to take the place of God. especially not your humanity. I think the interesting thing about Christianity is that it helps you find your humanity. I think the interesting things in the stories that you see about Jesus is Jesus often recognized the person's humanity. Even the Gentile woman, where he's like, even dogs, he saw humanity. And often he'll expose the humanity to them, and often what he's doing when he's rebuking people is he's making them, help them see their humanity, even the inconsistency that comes with humanity. So Brian Yarborough, who does all the edits and helps do the clips and everything, I've realized I get real preachy sometimes. I'm really getting in there and talking loud. I'm like, oh, I need to back up a little bit. I'm getting a little bit too preachy sometimes. But this is my passion. This is my passion to see us live in a world of grace. To really test ourselves to see, do we really believe this? Or is there even something happening in us unconsciously that just we don't? That it's just a game, that we're just winking all the time, and that we're just kind of like, well, are we opportunists? Are we looking for opportunities? That just basically, what works best for me? What works best for my bank account as well? What works best for me having a comfortable life? Well, I don't have to worry about it. I live in Seattle. It's a very liberal city. That kind of stuff. It's just, and then we see our neighbors suffering, and then we can't remain silent, because even silence often says, it can be a betrayal. Dr. King said, it's not the words of our enemies we'll remember, but the silence of our friends. And I'll say that's true. I remember watching my family go through, my parents go through their scandal, and my dad in prison, and the people who, I really do remember the people that didn't show up, and the people who kept their mouths closed. Even in my own life when I've struggled and I've been down on my luck, the people who show up and the people don't, but I'm like, where were you, And that's just human nature, but we have to remember that. So sometimes when we're silenced, and they also would say sometimes silence is you're deciding with the oppressor, whoever's in power, because you're just, you should really read the letter from a Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King. We'll probably go through that. We might go through that soon, actually. It's vital. I think it should be in the Bible. It's such a powerful letter. But where there were these, kind of middle liberal white Christians who were saying like, hey, let's slow down a little bit. Maybe we don't need, you guys need to, you're causing a lot of trouble, and we really like the way things were working. It was okay for us. and Dr. King writes why he's so disappointed with the moderates. And why he's so hurt. Because he thinks that maybe they're doing more damage than even people like Bull Connor and the segregationists. And that's what worries me sometimes with the left, is that we still allow things to happen, but if it's not right in front of us, we don't. And you can blame me for that too. I do that all the time too. It's not my site. I'm not thinking about it, so I'm not talking about it. I'm not working to bring justice, because I'm not seeing it, or I'm not looking deep enough into it. And it's a very worrisome place to be. So letter from a Birmingham jail, I recommend it. You can Google it after this, and you can read it. You can listen to recordings of it. There's so much of it out there, really. So I'm going to end with this, because reform has really been something I'm focusing on for the church. In order for us to reform, we must see things clearly, but we also must guard our hearts against bitterness. We must guard our hearts against bitterness. Bitterness will eventually lead to more division. It will eventually make us angry and depressed and separate ourselves. And even friends and loved ones will become enemies. Even those who we agree with, we will start to nitpick, because our bitterness creates division, and it creates separation. And I believe if you really want to know what sin is, that's the sin. The sin of Sodom was how it treated foreigners. That was the sin. It wasn't homosexual. It wasn't any of that. It's how it treated strangers and foreigners. So you must be the change you want to see. You must be the person that you needed at that time. So many of us needed someone there to tell us about grace or to show us love or to show us compassion at a particular time in our most legalistic moments and our most hateful moments or in our biggest moments of doubt, and no one was there. And, it's hopeless. And we often get so focused on ourselves that we forget that there's people out there who are struggling with this stuff who need to have these conversations, who need to hear your voice of love and grace and compassion. They also need to hear the truth. Often I'll be very straightforward with the truth with people because I want to see where it goes. I was trying to have this conversation with someone recently and they ended up rebuking the devil out of me because I was making too much sense because I was using verses because they were using verses. I said, well, what about this? What is this? There seems to be a lot more of these than those, what you're talking about. And they got angry. But still, even out of that, the hope is reconciliation. And the hope is that those nights people spend alone and sleeping in their bed, they'll start to think about this stuff. They'll start to feel their compassion. They'll start to see their humanity. People don't realize, like when people say a picture is worth a thousand words, I'll leave you with this, is during the Birmingham civil rights struggle, Dr. King spent a lot of time in jail. And they kept doing this, and to the point where they got young people involved. They got high school people involved. And a lot of people were really concerned because they were like, hey, civil rights leaders, not my kids, not my teenagers. This is a little bit much. And they said, no, we got to do this. And so kids were skipping school and coming out to march and all this stuff. And, Bull Connor's out there putting dogs, he's the police chief, putting dogs on people and clubs and stuff. And one young man, who decided to skip school that day as well, young black man, but really wasn't sure about being a part of the march because everybody was going to jail. So he thought, well, I'll just go downtown, kind of watch what's happening. And when he was watching what happened, a policeman comes up with a dog. Well, this particular young man was raised around big dogs. So when the dog came at him, he knew he just needed to put his foot up to stop the dog on his chest. And then the cop, he grabbed the cop's arm, and he was just trying to keep the cop and the dog at arm length, because he was just a spectator. Someone snapped that picture. And the next day, that picture went all over the world. And that changed what happened in Birmingham. That picture, that photo. A lot of people, no one knew the context of this was a kid skipping school that day, and he knew something about dogs. But it was such a dramatic photo because his legs and he's got his arm on the, what's happening, It changed the world. So when people say, well, I don't think these photos really change anything, or I don't think the internet changes anything. Well, it's because we become really numb to that stuff. But when you see these photos and see these things, you're moved by it. And they said that moment of that instant of the struggle allowed people to humanize that young man. And all it took was just curiosity of that young man. And that day he was a huge civil rights leader that made a huge difference in the movement around the world and caused people to see the humanity of their black brothers and sisters. And that's what we all need, those moments. So even your curiosity could lead to great change. Even just, I'm going to be an onlooker, I'm going to think about this, I'm going to look deeper into it. You never know what a small moment in time will do to change people's lives and to allow people to see others' humanity. And it's an odd story, but it's one that encourages me and reminds me that, to keep moving forward and keep sharing things and keep telling people and keep standing up for the truth. And that's just loving others. And Revolution's always been about that. We've always been about grace and things, and but as it grows in, it just continues to grow into saying, like, we got to recognize each other's humanity and help people see the other's humanity. Help people see, oh, this is the less than. These are the people that if I don't help, I'm not helping Jesus. So that's where we're at. I hope today encouraged you to continue to speak up, continue to work towards more inclusion and more love towards your brothers and sisters, and help us grow towards a real reformation in the church that is focused on humanity and not rules and regulations and all that stuff. Those are all great. We can have conferences and meetings and talk about that stuff. Organizing is important. Having organizations can be important, but we've got to keep that foundation of love, because otherwise it's just noise. It's just motions. And if we can keep that foundation of love and seeing those folks as our neighbors and loving them as ourselves and loving them as our own children, we will lead to radical change. But we have to keep it. Don't just let it, just don't store it and then throw it out. We got to remember these things as we move forward, because we've got to continue to make this world a safer place for all of us. So that's a talk from a follower of Jesus. That's a talk from someone who's following Christianity today. And, politically I could say all sorts of different things. But as someone who follows Christ and as a leader in the church, that's the message. That's it. It's all that. It's that love, and love is not easy. That's why it says love endures. We have to endure, because endurance is tough. But you know what? You'll learn from that endurance. So thank you all for coming out today. If you like our work, appreciate our work, please share these talks with your friends and other people, and share our stuff on social media and retweet our stuff. I'm not on Twitter anymore, but Instagram and Facebook and things like that. Let people know about our work. And if you really like what we're doing and you get something out of it and you want to help our work, you can go to revolutionchurch.com and make a tax-deductible donation. That's how Revolution continues to survive, with your financial support. And we'd much rather have you than your money, but your money helps keep this work going and helps this work grow. So if you would consider that, that would be huge, and it really, really helps, and it clears me up. Like tomorrow, I'm working 2 different jobs tomorrow and 2 different jobs the next day. I enjoy being able to do that and take care of my family, but I'd also love to be able to do this more and continue to move in the future and help Revolution be more of my main focus. So thank you all so much. Love and grace, and I'll see you through the week. Put on your notifications, because we'll be putting stuff over through the week as well. And thanks a lot. Love you guys. Take care of each other. Let's pray. Pray for LA. Let's pray for Israel and Gaza and all those folks. Lift those folks up, and let's fight for humanity. Bye-bye.